Chapter 4. Be satisfied with what you have. Louis was a hard-working, honest peasant, but he had no land of his own. Even though we have tilled Mother Earth since childhood, he would often say to his family, "We peasants will always die as we are living. If only we had our own land, it would be different." Very close to Louis' village, there lived a lady who owned an estate of about 300 acres. One winter, Louis came to know that she was going to sell her land. He also heard that a neighbor of his was buying 50 acres, and the lady had agreed to accept one half of the price in cash and next year the other half. "We must also buy at least 20 acres, he said to his wife. "Life is becoming worthless without any land of our own." So, Louis and his wife put their heads together and thought of a way to buy some land. They had laid by 100 rubles. They sold a colt and borrowed some money from a relative, and thus scraped together half of the money needed for the purchase. Having done this, Louis chose a farm of 40 acres and went to the lady and bought it. As Louis was a hard-working peasant, it was not difficult for him to raise a good harvest that season. Within a year, he managed to pay off his debts. So he became a landowner, plowing and sowing his own land, making hay in his own land, and feeding his cattle on his own pasture. Whenever he went to plow his fields, his heart would fill with joy. The grass that grew and the flowers that bloomed there seemed to him unlike any that grew elsewhere. Then, one day, Louis happened to meet a peasant who had come from beyond the Volga River where he had been working. One word led to another, and the man went on to say that much land was for sale there. "It is so good," he said, "that the rye sown on it grows as high as a horse, and so thick that 5 cuts of a sickle make a sheaf." Louis's heart was filled with desire. "Why should I suffer in this narrow hole," he thought, "if one can live so well elsewhere?" So Louis sold his land and homestead and cattle, all at a profit, and moved his family to the new settlement. Everything the peasant had told him was true, and Louis was 10 times better off than he had been. He bought plenty of arable land and pasture and could keep as many heads of cattle as he liked. Louis was pleased with it all, but when he got used to his new lifestyle, he began to think that he was still not satisfied. He wanted to sow more wheat, so he rented extra land for 3 years. The seasons turned out well, and the crops were so good that Louis began to lay money by. He might have gone on living well, but he grew tired having to rent other people's land every year and having to scramble to pay for it. "If only it were all my own land," Louis thought, "I should be independent and would save all this unpleasantness." Then, one day, a land dealer passing by the area said to Louis that he had just bought 13,000 acres of land from the land of Bashkirs far away, on for 1,000 rubles. "All one needs to do is to make friends with the chiefs," he said. "I gave away about 100 rubles worth dressing gowns and carpets, besides a case tea, and I got the land for less than 2 pence an acre. There now," thought Louis. "Out there I can get more than 10 times as much land as I have now. I must try it." So, Louis started on the journey to meet the Bashkirs. When the Bashkirs saw Louis, they came out of their tents to greet him. They gave them tea and kumis. The Bashkirs were glad to hear that he had come to buy some land, and took him to their chief. After listening to Louis, the chief said, "Choose whichever piece of land you like. We have plenty of it." "And what will be the price?" asked Louis. "Our price is always the same. 1,000 rubles a day. A day? What measure is that? How many acres would that be? That's for you to decide, said the chief. We sell it by the day. As much land as you can go round in a day becomes yours, and the price will be 1,000 rubles. Louis was surprised. But in a day you can go around a large area of land, he said. The chief laughed. It will be all yours, he said. But there is only one condition. If you don't return to the same spot where you started, your money is lost. That night, Louis lay on a feather bed and tried to sleep, but he could not. He kept thinking about the land. What large area I'll mark off, thought he. I can easily cover 35 miles a day on foot. The days are long now, and within a circuit of 35 miles, what a lot of land there will be. When Louis woke the Bashkirs up the next morning and reached the steppe, the sun had begun to paint the sky in a red glow. The chief took Louis to a hillock and stretched out his arm towards the plain. See, said he, all this, as far as your eye can see, is yours. You may have any part of it you like. The chief took out his fur cap and placed it on the ground to mark a start. Start from here and come back to this point. All the land that you go around before you reach this point again will be yours. Louis first walked slowly, then he began to walk faster. As he went along, he dug holes and placed large stones in them to mark the area that he had covered. When he had walked for more than 3 hours, he looked back to check if he could still see the hillock from where he started. He was glad he could not. Ah, thought Louis, I have walked far enough in this direction, and it is time to turn. He stopped, dug a large hole, placed a large stone in it. Then he had a long drink from his flask and continued walking briskly, this time towards the left. After a while, he grew tired. He looked up at the sun and saw that it was noon. Well, he thought, I must have a rest. He sat down and ate some bread and drank some water. After a little while, he got up and turned left to walk further ahead. He went a long way in this direction. He was about to turn left again when he saw a damp hollow. It would be a pity to leave that out, so he went around the hollow part and dug a hole to mark his path. Suddenly he realized that he had covered more land on this side, so he decided to make the third side shorter. He looked at the sun, and it was halfway to the horizon towards the west. He had 2 miles to cover on the third side of the square and 10 miles to reach his goal. Louis hurried, but he was beginning to grow tired. He longed for a rest but could not take it because he had no time. The sun waits for no one, and it was sinking lower and lower. Louis walked on and on. Although he found it very hard walking, he pressed on. He was still far from the place. He began running, throwing his coat, his boots, his flask, and his cap on the way. He ran on and on. The cap that marked the beginning was nowhere in sight. Louis was gasping for breath but wouldn't stop. He could feel something flowing out of his nose, sticky and red. He looked at the sun. It was almost near the earth. He ran and ran, then suddenly fell on the ground. The tall grass covered him. Louis's servants found him later and tried to raise him to his feet. Soon they realized that he would never rise again. They picked up the spade, which lay next to him, and dug a pit to bury him. All he needed was 6 feet of land from head to heels. So kids, be happy and satisfied with what you have got in life. Chapter 5.